Since the release of the video about the theoretical location of Vah Medoh and where Vah Medoh was buried, I've gotten a lot of comments asking me for more details and some other comments making some interesting assertions, and I wanted to check them out and provide some of my own research, as well as take a look at what's going on in the Tibantha region, because I think it's very interesting if you're a nerd anyway. So let's take a quick look. One of the things that I found really interesting about this discovery myself was the site, because on its face, when you look at it, we have a series of craters that are obviously craters. The edges of the craters are pushed up around them, and they look like impact craters, actually. So how could we... Why does that giant mechanical bird sit in there perfectly? I have an answer for you. To really understand this, we need to understand the Tibantha region and what's going on there, because what we see right now is not exactly the presentation of the region in the past. As for when, no idea at all. I can't even pretend to know. I have some rough ideas, but I'm still cataloging evidence for that, and there may not even be enough or any really good evidence for what's going on. What you need to understand about the Tibantha region as a subregion of Hebra is the entire region was covered in permafrost at some point. This is not just a theory that's actually backed up by the games. Permafrost is not an explanation for what's going on with Medoh's excavation site in the most direct way. I'm not gonna sit here and go, Medoh is buried under permafrost. I don't actually know. There's no way to know. What I do know, though, is that it explains the terrain that we see. So to really get into it, let's take a look at the post and lintel ruins from the Piper Ridge area. And you can see when you look at these ruins that, for the most part, they seem, for whatever's left of them, they're fairly intact as far as these types of ruins go compared to a lot of other places where they're just crushed. And in this game, you have no real signs of any kind of terrain disturbances whatsoever. And then let's jump to Tears of the Kingdom. We see the same style crater here that we see at the Jisa crater site. Why though? Why would that happen? Why would there be something with dirt and rock pushed up around the edges, kind of like an impact crater, without an impact? We do have a little bit of the zonai space pollution here, but that's not enough to create an impact crater of that size. So what could it be? The answer lay in what happens and what the inspiration was behind these craters for environment artists. Granted, I don't actually know 100% that this was their inspiration, because there's not really a way to know, but I would be willing to stake my entire reputation as a person who loves gathering evidence on the fact that this is most likely what it is. What these craters are is something called Pingo collapse. Pingo collapse happens when permafrost thaws in the real world, and it's ice cores, when ice cores begin to melt from permafrost, and there's an extremely high pressure that is on the surface, and throughout the thawing process, it actually causes these shallow subsidence events all over the place. And they aren't the only examples of this in this area. A quick look around the corner at Dragonbone Mire will actually show another type of formation that happens in cases when permafrost is dying. These are called thermokarstic formations, or thermokarst formations, or thermokarst wells, pick whichever one you like. They form in a kind of a similar way. It's not quite the exact same process. I think that there's some overlap there too, but they form in a very similar way. Ultimately, it happens during the thawing of permafrost, when it creates these shallow little subsidence events. And most of the time, they become either small lakes, small retention ponds, bogs, all kinds of things. In case of Dragonbone Mire, it obviously became a bog. Here's what those look like in the real world when they happen, and you're gonna immediately see just how spot on this is. So if you take a look at these examples, the first one is Pingo collapse, and it speaks for itself. You effectively have these short circular depressions in the land caused by permafrost thawing. And you can also see that the terrain around it does not have an abundance of plant life at the moment. It's kind of become very desolate and barren. This is very close to the Jisa crater site. And then you have thermokarst formations like Dragonbone Mire, where they form in a slightly different way. They're not always as destructive to the terrain around them. And you can even see in some of the thermokarst formations that it's actually a lot of green space around them. So most likely that's what happened here in this region. That's at least the environment artist inspiration behind what's going on in Tibantha. And then finally, I wanted to take a quick look at the measurements of the crater sites and comparing them to Vah Medoh. Thank goodness that things like Blender exist where you can measure things in meters. It made my job much easier to be able to take measurements between points in real-world math and not just Zelda map unit math. So I'll start with the wingtip craters because I think that's the one that everyone probably cares the most about, because I think that kind of is either like the proving point or disproving point, right? So the distance between the center points of the wingtip craters is 209 meters. Then if we take a Medoh's wingspan from hemisphere to hemisphere, not the tips, like complete tips, but like the two circular hemispheres, and we do that, it is 205.544 meters. It's a big bird. And it's more than that too, because obviously just the wingspan is not enough. That's enough that is just correlation. What I think really drives it home are the diameters of the craters compared to Medoh. So the crater measurements, the diameter of the belly crater would be 68.7 meters diameter. And then respectively, the two wingtip craters are 34.8 and 36.5 meters. Makes complete sense that they would be slightly different sizes. Thank goodness they didn't just copy and paste them. Raru's blessing shrine moment. The hemisphere measurements, the diameter measurements for those on Medoh are really, really interesting because they are actually slightly smaller than each crater, which is really cool. So the belly hemisphere on Medoh is 61.7 meters diameter, and then each wing hemisphere underneath is 27.5 meters. So this tells us that the hemispheres that sit under Medoh, like the belly, I say hemisphere because it's the best description, really, of what it is, but anyway, the hemispheres under Medoh are meant that they're cradled in these craters perfectly, which is cool. It's an insane attention to detail. So what is this? What would this mean effectively? Because they fit the hemispheres just barely, right? Like the belly crater gives a 7 meters of additional space on the diameter just to hold that. And then likewise, and rather curiously, it's about 7 meters on the wingtip hemispheres as well. Like that just barely fitting in there. It does suggest to me that Medoh's back was probably exposed. Now, here's the catch. Whether or not Medoh was actually there during permafrost, after permafrost, we don't really know. It is possible that Medoh may have been also buried in your snow for a period of time. It's really hard to say because we don't have any the best history that we have of the region is more or less that the story of the Stormwind Arc, and we don't really know exactly when that happened. And it seems like that happened before Medoh existed. So it's really hard to say. Anyway, I just wanted to share my research that went into my claim about Vah Medoh's excavation site. Goodness gracious, words are hard. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you have any thoughts or questions, please drop me a line. Until next time, friends.